Let's talk about the codependent narcissistic relationship. So what is that in your opinion?
So the codependent narcissist relationship is a dysfunctional connection where both people are actually trying to get their self-esteem from the other person, but in different ways. So obviously the narcissist is more about being the center of attention, being loved and admired. They have to get their way. They don't have a lot of empathy for other people's feelings. So they get their they get their self-esteem by being overly valued by the other. Whereas the codependent person doesn't have much of a sense of self, so they need to be needed. So they look to their relationship to validate who they are versus trying to get that by themselves. And, of course, doing that over time, this is going to be really hard because in the beginning, the narcissist is really charming. And I remember I had a girlfriend in college and she had this guy, big red roses every Friday, expensive dinners. And I was like, God, who is this guy? And sure enough, a couple months later, he started being really controlling and narcissistic. And it's like, it takes a while to uncover that. But once that gets uncovered, that's when it gets really challenging for people, which is why I'm so glad you're having this summit.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And it's such an interesting, I love your answer because I've never really thought of it that way, right? Like there's like this common thread between whether you're codependent or you're narcissistic, right? There's a common thread of that low self-esteem and trying to get our needs met, right? Whether this way or that way, but like the core is the same, that's fascinating. I've never heard anyone say it like that. That's
I know.
great.
Isn't that interesting? Well, of course I was reading up for this and because most people think of the narcissist as, oh, they have too much sense of self, but really underneath that, they really have the same issue.
Right. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And yes, who could act in certain ways if they didn't, have lots of probably childhood wounds and all sorts of things from the past that, probably make them feel pretty darn inadequate. So let's talk about what would you say is the first thing someone should do when trying to navigate this kind of codependent narcissistic dance?
So attending your summit, educating yourself, honestly, on narcissism, because what happens for the codependent is they don't trust themselves. So they get into this kind of relationship. And then once the narcissistic abuse starts and they're being put down a lot, they actually believe it. So part of what happens is we have to educate ourselves because what that's going to do is two things. One, it's going to help us feel less alone. Like, oh my God, other people are actually in the same boat. I'm not crazy. And then it's actually going to help us not take their behavior personally, because when you realize it's a syndrome and it's a specific pattern of behavior that happens again and again, it's harder to personalize it because you can say, oh gosh, this article is saying the exact thing that I'm going through. And to me, that's the starting point, is to start to detach yourself from taking it personally and thinking that it's all about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because of course, so many of us could do that, and it's something maybe we have done since we were kids. If a parent was narcissistic, right? It's like, oh well, this must be all about me. I'm a little kid. It must be my fault. So take that into the future. So
well, and then the gaslighting starts once the honeymoon's over, and that's when the narcissist will make you feel crazy by denying your reality whenever you have a difference of opinion or anything. So that just reinforces that lack of self-doubt in the codependent. Mm-hmm. So, knowing that gaslighting behavior is going to happen in a weird way is really validating, because okay, that's what they're doing when they feel threatened, when they want power, when they want the domination in the relationship again. That's how they assert it. They make us feel bad because that's going to make us follow them, and in a dysfunctional way, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Yeah. So interesting. I'm curious. I'm thinking in this moment, right? I'm always curious about, the term narcissism versus like narcissistic personality disorder specifically.
Yeah.
It seems like narcissism and people are narcissistic is thrown out all over the place these days. Yeah. Like, how much do you think like people are actually narcissistic personality disorder versus just using that term?
I've heard it's very low. To really have the full-blown personality disorder is really not as common. But the problem is that a lot of people have narcissistic traits. So they might be self-centered. They might have a hard time with empathy. So we hear those symptoms and we assume, oh, they're narcissistic versus, well, they may not be full-blown narcissistic in every sense of the word. They may just have a few traits. But yeah, I think that's a really common issue, is we want to label somebody versus, well, it may or may not be completely accurate, may just be partially accurate.
Yeah. Yes. And it's all like a spectrum too, right? I think we all have our
Absolutely.
own level of like narcissistic traits and codependent traits, that just depends on who you are and what shows up for you. So let's talk about for the codependent person, what can the codependent person do to heal themselves? And I think this is where you're going to take us through your 4 keys.
Yes. So the first thing is they have to develop self-trust, because part of why codependent people get into relationships with narcissists is because most likely in childhood, they had their thoughts and feelings dismissed. So if we grow up and we have an alcoholic parent, we have a rageful parent, but the other parent says, no, that's not happening. We don't have alcoholism in our home. Dad's not rageful. We totally get our experience denied. That, of course, we're going to not have self-trust. We're going to question every perception we have, which is a setup for these kind of relationships. So for us to be able to develop some sense, and sometimes honestly, you have to act as if at first, like, okay, what is it that I'm thinking and feeling, and how can I really start to cultivate that? Because that's going to help with the gaslighting. Because eventually you're going to get to a point where you're going to go, this doesn't feel right. What they're saying does not ring true to me, but that's where the recovery part comes in. Now, the second part is we have to know our boundaries. And if you're codependent, that can be challenging, right? So one way I have people do this is list out all the hurtful behaviors you're experiencing in this relationship. Because what that's going to do is that's going to tell you where your limits are. When they make you feel bad, when they call you names, when they do guilt trips, when they gaslight you, because all of those behaviors are going to be the starting point of you being able to actually walk away from that behavior. Because boundaries are scary when you're codependent. They were for me. I didn't want to make a conflict. I didn't want to risk having a confrontation. And let's face it, narcissistic people are really good verbally at sparring. So really the best thing you can do initially is to just walk away and say, you know what, I'm not going to participate in this, because that is a very powerful boundary to realize the other person is not going to put up with or listen to being spoken to that way.
Yeah. It makes me wonder too about, when you just said that about basically just leaving as opposed to like getting in that sparring match or whatever, right? A lot of codependent people probably relate to like wanting to defend themselves and like, like that whole defensiveness kind of thing. And that's a tough one, right? Especially I would imagine if you're being, gaslighting is happening, because you're like, well, no, that's not how it was or whatever. Any thoughts there, like on how people can, I don't know, really like manage that defensiveness?
Well, I think that's where number 3 comes in, is getting support, because you cannot heal a narcissistic relationship by yourself. And you can't heal yourself in isolation. So part of what you need to do is you need to have that support and that mentorship so that you can, one, realize, okay, I'm being gaslit right now, and my friends and my support system are right there with me. So I can remove myself and do something different. Because in the moment, it's really hard not to get defensive, because you're going to want to, especially if this has happened in childhood, you're going to want to defend yourself. But that may be where something like positive self-talk comes in, and you say, you know what, this isn't about me. I'm not going to win this argument anyway, because they're going to go to the death with it. The best thing I need to do is walk away. And sometimes we have to learn that through hard experience to realize, you know what, when I do stand up for myself, I just get beaten up more emotionally.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that like the power of just stopping what you're doing and going away, I think that's something that a lot of people don't right? We always think about, oh, what should the response be and how should we handle
Right.
it and all these kinds of things. But that's a very powerful response, right? It's like the response is almost no
Yeah.
response, or just response is, oh, no, this is not working for me right now.
Right.
I'm out of here. I can't take this anymore.
Yeah. Well, and that's where the education comes in, because after you listen to this summit and after you read about narcissism, you're going to know, okay, this is a pattern of behavior that isn't about me. So in the moment when you're being gaslit, you can say, this isn't about me. This is narcissism. And that's going to help you detach enough to not take it to mean, oh my God, this is all about me.
Right.
Right. Because that's what the narcissist wants. They want that power back. So if they can make us wrong and get us to believe it, then the pattern doesn't change and they stay the authority, which, isn't healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay. So we did self-trust, know your boundaries, getting support. Did you talk about the fourth one yet? Or have we
not yet. Okay. The first thing though, I'm going to say with getting the right support is